I would like go outside to the lawn and with a pair of scissors and be cutting the lawn and pretending like I was cutting Mother Earth's hair. And remember, I would be like talking to her like, girl, you look so beautiful, like da 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 da. So there was like this very, like very alive fantasy world, but I got the message very early on that that was mine and mine to hold, and it was not safe to publicize.
Have you ever felt the need to hide your true self? Shame, fear, and self-hatred are powerful forces, and breaking free from them is worthy of the grandest party you can imagine. In celebration of Pride Month and the joy of self-expression, I've invited one of the most intuitive guides I've ever met to honoring yourself. Meet Ryan Walker Page.
Hi, my name is Ryan Walker Page. I am a choreographer and movement teacher in Los Angeles, California. Recovery is a very central part of my life, and I'm thankful to be many years out of symptom use, but still really center this experience as a big part of my identity.
As a sought-after choreographer, Ryan has worked with big names, people like Lil Nas X, Renee Zellweger, Samuel L. Jackson, and many, many more. Part of what's made him so successful is that he reaches into his past, the turbulent years of shame, disordered eating, and fear, and pulls from those experiences a sacred respect for people as they are. Through dance, he conspires to mythologize the parts of ourselves we are the most scared to share.
Recognizing that a lot of people have had haunting experiences being in their body. So let's create our own mythology here. Let's make it more exciting than you looking at you and just auditing yourself and body for damage.
Today, we'll discuss those past experiences, navigating recovery in the body-centric creative industries, and how coming out isn't just a singular event, but a lifelong unfolding. You are listening to Mental Note Podcast. I'm Ellie Pike. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Ryan. And you have an incredible, incredible story I'm excited to share with our listeners. So let's just dive right on in. I'm curious what your childhood was like, and if you could tell us about your coming out experience.
Yeah, of course. I grew up in the South, so it was very baked beans, Bible study, bingos, barbecue, like all of that. And
All of the bees.
all of the bees. And, I find this a lot with like young queer kids, like definitely had an orientation to the feminine. Like I was obsessed with putting towels on my hair and like commanded fantasy to like bring to life some of these ideas of being like elegant and over the top. And that was like not a safe domain in the South. So I think I like grew up with a pretty early sense of duplicity of like, this is me and there's something going on out there that I don't really belong in. And I think that's painful to inherit so early on, is like that severed sense of belonging. And especially when you don't have the emotional equipment to like really process what that means or looks like, you just sort of take it on, you know?
Absolutely. It sounds like the message you got was, I have to hide from a really early age.
Right.
And did you notice that you would start to overcompensate on the other side of things of what you presented to the world?
Absolutely. I found myself doing like a pretty harsh turn of the wheel and going straight into sports and like acting out all of this like free floating arousal and rage that was just pent up from, all of this stuff that had happened before. And like, I was the kid on the basketball team that was like getting penalties and I was like breaking rackets. And I was like so ready to go rogue because I think like what was happening inside was just so much so overwhelming, and I couldn't really locate it on the outside world. So anger felt like my only Trojan horse to really express these things. And, sports really safeguarded me from being bullied and teased, and, more profoundly coming to terms with myself that that I am a gay man. So it felt like a safe cover up. And I enjoyed it. It wasn't all like dark and pathological. I love throwing a ball in a hoop. I mean, come on.
That's incredible. But it sounds like it was all under the guise of being hyper masculine and using that as essentially a cover up for, it seems like, the shame that you were feeling inside, that was really internalized by your culture. So, how did you handle that on your own when you were carrying so much of that heavy load?
I think I developed like a really rich private world that became like a cornerstone of solace, which is confusing when solace is so intertwined with secrecy. And but I like had to build that space for myself. I think it made a lot of sense to like be using my body through all of this. I've always like naturally turned to the body to like run a sort of like life force that I feel, and like manage this sort of like charge and discharge I'm constantly feeling emotionally. It helps sort of like equalize it or something. And then, of course it like matters to find kids your age that are like, oh, you too, me too. And in public school, that was like harder to find, but I had like a real great ring of power and these like little like girlfriends that I had that wanted to make up dances and like wanted to like sing songs about the dead cicada we found on the baseball field with me. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like this like dark corner of reality. I had some friends that could mirror back to me like, I like what you do, and hey, I like doing that too, which at that age and at any age, I would argue, matters.
Absolutely. And it seems so important to have those pockets of safety and self expression and feeling understood. And somewhere in here, you also started dance when you were a teenager. Is that right?
Yes. So, as like a result of the bullying, which was like pretty ferocious, I was placed in a different school, and it was a Quaker school, which, oh my God, was like such a balm to the heart, but it was also confusing because it was such a 180. Quakerism, at least in this, like the educational environment, like values community and passivity and integration and silence as an expression of God. And it was just a much more inclusive framework, in theory and practice. And so I went there, and suddenly I found boundaries that I had so depended on of like, I'm a 13-year-old guy. That means I like X, Y, and Z. And I felt really sold into that blueprint. Like those started to dissolve a bit. And I started to notice like this, I remember the star of the soccer team also was taking dance. And so like, again, that really mattered to me because that felt like that could be my road to town. Like if he is doing it, I can do it. And I wanted to take dance, and I like wanted to move my body based on how the trees were moving in the wind last night. You know what I mean? All of that had a certain stickiness and aliveness to me, and it felt really amazing when I got a more socialized permission to try that on. And so that was my introduction to dance, was like very much creative expression. Didn't have a lick of technique, didn't really understand what that was. It didn't feel high stakes. And I think a lot of dancers come from a background of competition dance, which is challenging because you inherit this idea of dance as a practice that is steeped in hierarchy. It's like, how bad do you want it? We're gonna win. Like, there's gonna be a trophy. Yeah, so I started at this Quaker school, and it was very much like, how do you feel dance that way? And I used to have a lot of contempt for the fact that that was my introduction to dance, feeling like I didn't have the skills. And now I realize it that it's my leading edge, that was my foundation, my root system for movement. Something about being there inspired me to audition for a really rigorous dance conservatory for the rest of high school. It was a boarding school. And so I remember I like showed up and everyone was looking like beautifully groomed in their tights and, shoes and what have yous. And like I had like long johns and an inside out Grateful Dead t-shirt and like purple hair and like sticking out like a sore queer thumb. And I remember it was like my first technique class and I like just sort of like stumbled and crumbled through it and had no idea what I was doing. But then we got to do our own solo and they liked it and they recognized the sort of like raw enthusiasm that I had. So I got into that school when I was 14 and with a note, mind you, saying that I was going to be one of the worst people there and that I was immediately on something called like body probation and creative probation. But for some reason that didn't feel in my way. I was just sort of had a more Labrador energy of like, oh my God, yes, whatever, I'll figure it out. And
that's incredible that you were able to bypass that criticism from the start.
Girl, totally. It's like one of the most honest reactions I've ever had to anything in my life. You know what I mean? And like,
well, it meant you were supposed to be there.
Yeah, totally. And so I go to that school and it is pulling out a whole new job description for dance. It is like 8 hours a day, mind you, with a cast of teachers that are still pretty much grieving the loss of their careers and, reversal in their like body's abilities. And they take out all of that onto us and as their students. And so it was really sort of this idea of like classroom as projection of their unfinished business and grief. And we took the hit and it was brutal. And they were like so mean and so like draconian in their ways. And that set the stage for some already existing, but like pretty heinous self-talk and ideas of self and specifically my body. I was still in the closet, hanging on by the last thread. And my roommate walks in the first day and I just like, it was so disarming. He was like this gorgeous Danish boy and his skin looked like someone took a piece of parchment paper and dipped it in milk and just like slapped it on a skull. Like he was just so perfect. And I just didn't even have a precedent for like understanding gay beauty and how it just really like dropped all of my weaponry. And I just remember feeling in every inch of my body like I am so attracted to this person, I'll do anything. There was just no way to detangle this like surge of feeling, and so like he was my first kiss. I came out to him. My whole coming out process in a huge way was like mapped out on this person, and it was existing in this sort of like context of secrecy, of just sort of like what happens behind these closed doors stays here or else. So that is a pretty nasty original template to take on in your first relationship of like, I'll do this, but as long as it sort of stays private so the world can't see. And I think that really translated as like pretty heavy, heinous shame about there's something about me that is why this equation exists for him.
You really bring up a good point of like linking shame with secrecy. And I remember an old mentor of mine would always talk about shame and say, shame exposed loses all power. And it sounds like you were wanting that opportunity, but your story was also intertwined with someone else's coming out story. And it became really complicated. And that shame and secrecy, what happened to you personally as you experienced that?
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, I totally agree that the sort of like conflation of that identity work between him and I made it really confusing, to be fair, for both of us. And I think, like any sort of relationship, time away allows you to put the camera into focus. And what's been beautiful looking back on it is just like that sense of like compassion for that 14, 15-year-old self, truly navigating this stuff with two hands over his eyes, you know? But at the time, I felt so lost, and that was coordinated with like some changes in my body, and I was getting all of this feedback from the outside world that like, this is good, you're desirable now, this is your ticket to ride. And I think like as gay men, we're subject to take on this idea that like our body is the thing that's going to make us indispensable and ultimately be loved in life. So really, go for this like Adonis archetype that a lot of us inherited through just like looking at porn, which was for me my only hidden curriculum of like what being gay meant, because my parents are straight. I have no gay people in my family and no gay people around. So like I turned to the closest thing. And all of that was just like so much. And I didn't really have an overwhelming, and I am such a sensitive person. And like any organism, when someone or something is overwhelmed, you have to find a way to relieve yourself or discharge yourself of that saturation point. Bulimia really slipped in perfectly as this like maladaptive behavior, because it was like really registering how overwhelmed I was and then gave me something to do with it. You know, my sense of well-being and my friendships, all of that, of course, false collateral damage, but it like really served a purpose for a second, and until it doesn't. You're giving your whole self to something that will never give back. It just will never give back. And it's like an abusive relationship, you know? So I like found that and was in the riptide of bulimia at boarding school, so in a dance culture. So there wasn't any real eye on me, because being a man with an eating disorder, you can hide in plain sight. And there's not really, at least at that point, like a socialized precedent to like say like, hey, are you getting help with your eating disorder, to like a teenage guy? And it's just a huge blind spot. Of course, my friends were concerned. Like I started passing out. My body was like being like, help. And I was like going into these like crisis modes physically. And eventually push comes to shove, I get kicked out of this school and I go home. 3 days later, I end up in the children's hospital at University of North Carolina, because there wasn't any space for men in any treatment center that had like an inpatient level at the time. So there's like no therapist. I was like sharing this floor with like pediatric oncology patients, and just feeling more alone and freakish than ever before, with all of these things strapped up to my heart. No one really asking me how I'm doing. It's all just sort of chaos and silence, and which is absolutely the choreography of shame, like chaos, silence, push it underground. And I remember this really specific moment. I had this hard-ass doctor who would like come in every morning. It was a teaching hospital with like a round of people, like students. And he would be like, Ryan's disease is what got him here. And I had never been in the recovery circle. So hearing things like that, it was just sort of like, why are you punishing me? But then I remember one day he came in alone. And this was like after a week of being there. And I remember the doctor put his hand on my shoulder and he was like, you must be in so much pain. And I just like broke down sobbing because it was just the first time I felt like someone like recognized my humanity in this whole situation. My whole sense of self had been caught up in behaviors and crisis and secrecy and needing to, I just had not touched down with myself or anyone else. And then that really became the gatekeeper to something a little more honest and like me encountering me and checking in. So I would find myself taking on this still like the same, message that I've given myself of like, your way to be loved is to define yourself as special and taking up charismatic space. And if your real experience falls as casualty, no big deal, because this is the way people are going to love you. And I think that is like a pretty signature thesis of like gay shame is like, I, at my core, feel unlovable. So why don't I hyper excel in these other areas? And that is how people will love me for who I am. When really that's an arsenal that is like, exists on the peripheries of just like a come as you are statement and like learning you as you.
Well, that is so incredibly hard when you haven't been accepted for who you really are, right? And then you're grappling with, is it safe for me to come out? And would I really be loved if I'm truly honest with myself and authentic in this world? So you did. I mean, you've done that courageous walk, and it is a courageous walk. I give you so gosh, what is the word? Like, I just give you so many props, really, for like channeling that and going through this process that's way, way hard. So what was that coming out process like for you with your parents and then with the world?
I think the coming out process like happens in layers. Like first you have to come out to yourself, and like then you come out to your friends, and then you come out to your parents, and then you like come out to the city you live in, kind of thing. And like I can really see my own experience sort of mapped out in that sequence. I came out to myself around 16, and I say that with a sort of finger scratching my head because there's always been this underbelly of like, I know who I am and I know this is true. And I just sort of like developed this like intense way to push it underground my whole life. But I've always been out to myself to some extent, and shared that first with my roommate because it was someone that, again, I could say, oh, you too, me too. And the safety of that allowed for the first step. And then when I was 18, my parents, oh my God, this is so crazy. And I think this is a family-friendly story, but I was at home with this boy, and we were just like fooling around in bed, and we had like a video camera up, and then my mom walks in, and she just, I remember this so specifically. She was like wearing this like green batik dress, and she just slammed her back against the wall and just started sobbing, crying down. And I just like remember shouting out, I was like, Mom, I was giving him a massage, relax. And I still have that video, which is so wild. But for me, I'm like, oh my God, this is so precious. And like, I just flood that like, I think it was actually 17-year-old boy with so much compassion because I was like, this was in broad daylight. And still I felt the need to say like, don't look. It's anything else but this.
Right. Like and you're like completely exposed and still like wanting to deny what's happening. And
oh my God. Wow. I mean, it's just such an inside job. Yeah. And so then I like came out to my parents, and my mom is just inconsolably sobbing about how she'll never have grandchildren. And my dad just sort of like, I think he was trying to be fair. And my dad is like a little more disengaged, but like ship in the night, pretty steady and sure. And he was like, why do you have to define yourself? You can just keep exploring. Which in the moment felt like nice permission. And quickly after felt like you're not hearing what I'm saying. And it's actually like disavowing a pretty vulnerable moment of me telling you I am gay. And so, it's taken a long time with my parents. My mom was more volatile. Like I remember 2 weeks after her upset, she like joined a protest and was like, I could just hear her like saying like, gay is okay. Gay is okay. And then like she saw me wearing a wig and she broke down into tears. And like, she just like, it was really, and she was flooded. And my dad, it's been a more consistent climb. Like at dinner, we like were talking about like craziest first dates or something. And my mom went, and my dad went, my sister went. And I was like delighted to hear about it. It was fun, but fully not expecting to be asked. And my dad was the first person that was like, wait, I want to hear about Ryan's craziest first date. And the healing and acceptance has come from unexpected places and people, which like sounds about right. Nothing is ever going to be this fully choreographed fabric. It's always going to get intercepted by surprise. And that's beautiful.
That's an incredible story. And the way you describe it of like the weave, right? Like it's in and out, in and out. It takes a lot of vulnerability from you and a lot of patience and a lot of invalidation and validation. And so as you look back on that, I hope that you're able to see that you were incredibly courageous in allowing yourself to keep coming out.
Thank you. I love what you're saying about keep coming out. I think a lot of us, straight, gay, however you identify, approach coming out as like this like one-time gatekeeper into someone's sexual identity, when the reality of this, like this is an evolving rapport with oneself that is about getting a higher reach into identity freedom. So if you need to come out every day of your life, girl, come out every day of your life. Do not sort of be sanctioned off by this sort of performative one-time idea of what a coming out thing is. The idea is that you can take up space. It's a strategy of visibility. It's you getting to know you, which we know, especially in the overlap with recovery, is never a linear thing. This is a trudge that moves in waves and circles and zigzag and wiggly doos, whatever. And you should allow yourself the permission to reflect that in your own sort of chewing and continuous expression and grappling with these things. You'll have more like of a fulfilling time the more you talk about it and experience.
You have such beautiful words for that. You just made that continual coming out feel like vitalizing and beautiful, even though it can be extremely, extremely hard.
Yes, totally.
So you might have already answered this question. After you came out to your parents, you came out to the city of New York City when you moved.
Yeah.
What's one of the many lessons that you learned along the way, if you just had to pick one?
I would say that the things that we have a lot of contempt for in ourselves end up being our leading edge. Like I think about what I shared earlier with like, I had so much contempt for the fact that my introduction to dance was non-traditional. And felt like that was like making me inferior and inadequate and behind the times. And with time, I've been like, God, I can walk away with my head held high and a beaming heart, knowing that that was my inroad into movement. And I think the same thing can be generalized into coming out of just like these things that we like apologize for in our body or our personality is like, actually the world is starving for it and are the ingredients to like your unique opening in the world. And I know that sounds like in the sort of particular self-help rhetoric, but I've just seen it so much and I see the contagion of it. And if like you're not doing it for yourself, I promise you some 10-year-old isolated queer kid in whereversville, Nebraska is looking at you being like, you too, me too. And so that connection is more precious than diamonds. And you've got to trust in the alchemy of being yourself, even if it doesn't feel good. And there's, of course, this other side issue of like coming out is not a neutral playing field. Different people in different situations with different demographics, coming out is rooted in structural issues of safety. And so if it's not safe to come out, then that is a whole nother conversation. But if it is, then there are people that can learn from you by you being you. It's like that Erykah Badu thing of like, keep doing you, someone's gonna feel it. You know what I mean? I love that.
And I appreciate the way you talk about it too, because it seems like you have really embraced that perspective of just be you. And that's what the world needs is, you fully alive.
Fully alive.
And I really appreciate.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yes, fully alive. And I see this too of like, it's really tempting and easy as a gay person to like co-opt what we see. So I can imagine like what's being circulated in mass media, like RuPaul's Drag Race and the vernacular from that. I see a lot of young gay kids taking that on as their curriculum for identity and start walking around being like, okay, girl. And I'm like, if you're like a grumpy queer who likes horror movies and making flower arrangements, that is beyond amazing. You know what I mean? The whole point of being queer is that we like dismantle this idea of the norm. And so like get a leading edge into you, whatever it looks like. It's about like putting yourself out there and building some power behind it.
So I imagine that your story doing that of like finding that freedom and authenticity in the world took time and it was a process. But when did you feel that freedom and when you could fully embrace your identity as a queer person?
Again, that is a journey in layers. Like, because there are times in my life that I can identify, like I got hired by this dance company that like had opera singers and drag queens and little kids and old people that I felt like this is a walking invitation to another way to be in society and like a place that honors who I am. And I was still very sick and like binging and purging 10 times a day. And I felt freer than I'd ever had in my life. So like those moments are complicated for me to really digest in my life story. But I think it brings up an important point of like, just because you are wherever you are in recovery, if you are still struggling, that doesn't airbrush out your journey to freedom. You are still entitled and able to have beautiful, transformative, connected experiences and a little more patience with yourself. I fully never thought my eating disorder was going to fall off. It was so intense and heinous. And I had found a life to like coordinate friendship and opportunity with dragging my eating disorder along all the way. When I think about freedom, I think about those really colorful, expansive moments. But in this moment, my idea of freedom has much more to do with the fact that I can live an honest life now, and I don't have to hide things. My house is clean. My like car is clean. I just feel so much more in my life, and it doesn't sound as exciting, but like watching my eating disorder fall off has been like the most spiritual and freeing thing of my life, and very much to do with me feeling free as a queer person too, because it was like healing that sort of young kid in me that was a repository for all of this shame that, was clipped off along the way, and sort of like retrieving him back into my life and feeling like a whole person again. So there's not one moment I can feel being free. I mean, there's like dancing in nature with other queer people, like relationships, all these things I can identify, but it really is anchored in just a more honest go in recovery and having so much more of a sobering acceptance of what it does look like and warding off the need for some sort of precious comeback story. It's just, me dealing with me.
Well, and I appreciate that when you describe that, you really take away the idea that recovery or life or coming out or finding freedom is linear, and that it's such a process, and there's ups and downs or a cycle or, layers, however you want to think about it. It's very complex. And so for you to talk through it, I really appreciate that because you give the rest of us a lot of freedom to be in whatever process we're in and find freedom in those moments. And then also freedom in the big things. And that is an incredible, incredible piece for our listeners to take away.
And freedom doesn't always feel good. Like I remember someone defined anxiety as the dizziness of freedom. So I'm not talking about some cycle of idealism here with what freedom was really painful and confronted me with a lot of grief and sense of emptiness in my life. But it's one of those things that just had to exist. And now I can look back on it and being like, wow, that is the most freeing thing I've ever done for myself, even though it really felt like the dark night of my soul.
So now, gosh, you are a dance choreographer in LA in the pop scene, and you're in recovery. Gosh, you have freedom. It's always a process. So how do you stay centered, balanced, grounded, whatever word you want to use, while you're in recovery in the dance scene?
It's tricky. I feel really lucky to be working with like women in the pop industry right now. Working in pop music in this way has been incredibly special in the way that it ties me to me at 9 years old, because it wasn't some downtown dance theater performance that got me to dance at first. It was Britney Spears and the Spice Girls, and highbrow, lowbrow, it's all good, and to be more directly supporting this sort of new cast of women in the pop sphere feels really karmically amazing. And it is equally, if not more, exhausting. It's dealing with an exhausting maze of personalities that don't have a hand in dance, and a lot of people who are trying to control women's public image. So being a really sensitive person, it's felt sad some of the times. And the beauty about movement is that it doesn't exact this sort of instant transformation thing. So you get to make it a patient game with these people. I listen more than I talk. I want them to feel that movement is something that is self-initiated and not something that I'm slapping onto them. Because in that fissure of like, I feel this way, but here, do this thing, like that can be really painful and breed a lot of feelings of inferiority. And I feel a hyper sense of responsibility going through my own struggles with eating disorders to not enable problematic language or ideas around the body. And sometimes like that is the nature of the job, that it's very like hypersexualized. And what I'm talking about more is just like that person's relationship with their own body, because you can do a hypersexualized video and still have a home base to come back to. And I have no control over what the creative is going to be. So I try to focus on the sort of like slower burn of like, how do you feel about you? And regardless of what the music video or the performance looks like, what's that home base you're coming back to? What are your tools for being centered? So I start every session with like a grounding practice and slow motion movement, which is like some of the most beautiful to see these like pop people who are so like full on move with me to classical music and for 5 minutes with their eyes closed has been some of the most beautiful memories and private memories I'll have for the rest of my life. It's just beautiful to watch people slow down in general, and to feel like a guardian of that slowing down feels like a gift for me too, because I know in my process, when I slow down, that's when my clarity and confidence slides in.
And it really leads well into my next question, because for you personally, movement and dance has been an act of body and self-acceptance, and it's not that way for everyone. And so it sounds like slowing down is part of that. I know you've used the words like expressiveness and like free flow. So what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I really try to approach it with this idea of like chasing sensation over aesthetics. A lot of us are like bound to the mirror and in this sort of like visual era of like, does this look cool? How do I look when I do it? And you really have to put that on ice and go for how it feels. So I always try to like approach it from like imagery and sensation and mythology and just making the world of dance bigger than what's being fed back to you in the mirror. So like a lot of my choreography I pull from like references in like Greek myths and medieval times, and like the drama is real because the point is that let's create our own mythology here. Dance as possibility is what I'm after.
Oh, that sounds so beautiful. And, I think one big piece of your story that stands out to me is how there was so much secrecy, so much shame, so much that you felt like you had to keep hidden. And then dance is so expressive, so outward. While it can still be a very personal experience, it's something that you invite others into. So have you found connection and kind of the opposite of shame and secrecy along the way?
Oh my God, totally. Like dance is at its roots a social phenomenon. And I think capitalism really thwarts it in our head of just sort of like, I'm in it to win it, honey, and I'll do whatever it takes. And it is important that if you're on that mission, you can balance it out with feeling in relationship to other people. I mean, I like do auditions. I like host auditions a lot for like jobs that I'm doing. And I see dancers doing all their tricks. And like, I remember at one of this like last ones, but before COVID, a dancer tried to like fit in this leap and hit the other girl in the face. And we had to have this like big moment of like, there is no idea that is more important than the person next to you's safety. And even when you're by yourself, like space is your intimate partner. The floor is your intimate partner. Like fall in love with you in relationship to something else, not just sort of like me, you know?
I really love the perspective of being intertwined and that dance is social despite your own personal experience and expression doing it.
Yeah.
Ryan, you are just an inspiration. And if people want to follow along with you and see what you're up to, what's the best way that they can follow you?
Probably Instagram. My Instagram is at Ryan Walker Page. And my email is linked. I love starting dialogue with people. So feel free to shoot me a line.
If you had one message that you would hope to give to someone who's exploring their sexuality or maybe struggling along the way, what's your message to our listeners?
Become a researcher. Use the internet to find people that are like you and build that sort of ring of power around for yourself. Loneliness is the rotten fruit of the tree and something that queer people are way too familiar with harboring. So I encourage you to take a risk, reach out, connect with people. This wild, lawless frontier of the internet allows us to do things that social barriers prevent us from doing. So if you see someone that's inspiring you, on the west side of Bangladesh, hit them up. Tell them that they're inspiring you. Like, keep the channel open.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much just for having this conversation with us and keeping that channel open. I think it's so important to share people's stories, and yours is beautiful and full of courage and vulnerability and connection and healing. So thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate you.
Are you kidding? Thank you so much. I'm like so honored to do this. And happy Pride Month. Oh my God.
Yes. Happy Pride Month, everyone. Please reach out if you need any support, and please follow Ryan too. I'm sure you'll be inspired.
Leave what's heavy behind. Leave what's heavy
Ryan said a couple of things that really stuck with me in our conversation. First is the idea that there's a community waiting for you to be you. I love that he reminded us that the definition of queer is dismantling the idea of quote-unquote the norm. By embracing these parts of ourselves that feel shameful, we're likely to find what makes us truly strong. As much as I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ryan, I can't wait for you to experience his choreography. You've simply got to see it for yourself. Head on over to his website, ryanwalkerpage.com, or find him on Instagram at ryanwalkerpage. Mental Note is a creation of Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center. Mental Note is a creation of Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center. If you'd like to talk to a trained therapist to see if treatment is right for you, please call them at 877-850-7199. Eating Recovery Center and Pathlight Mood and Anxiety Center are also hosting their annual conference as a virtual event this summer. Join hundreds of professionals on August 24th and 25th for the 2021 Pathlight Conference, titled Transformative Solutions in Mental Health Treatment. It will include 10 research-based presentations on the complexities of mood, anxiety, and trauma-related disorders. Attendees can earn up to 15 CE credit hours, as well as learn practical skills to identify, assess, and treat patients with mental health disorders. Sign up at pathlightbh.com/event/pbh-conference. If you like our show, sign up for our e-newsletter and learn more about the people we interview at mentalnotepodcast.com. We'd also love it if you left us a review on iTunes. It helps others find our podcast. Mental Note is produced and hosted by me, Ellie Pike, and directed by Sam Pike, with editing help on today's episode from Ian Kelsall.
Leave what's heavy, what's heavy behind. Leave what's heavy, what's heavy behind.